Tonight on Primetime Politics, rebuilding Canada's auto industry.
Without tariff-free access, the Canadian auto industry might not survive.
Conservatives bring their auto plan to the House of Commons, debating a strategy the party argues will bring back thousands of Canadian jobs. But critics say the plan conveniently ignores Trump's trade policies. Coming up, we'll get a response from the Conservative Shadow Minister for Labour. Also,
we are in about the best bargaining position. We're way ahead of schedule.
Trump's war on Iran. What do Americans make of the president's handling of the conflict, and how is it affecting Trump's own political fortunes? We'll get the view from the U.S. Capitol. Plus, Quebec's Bill 21 at the Supreme Court. We'll examine what's being asked of the highest court and whether or not the court is willing to intervene. This is Primetime Politics. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, the Conservative leader brought his auto plan to the House of Commons today. Unveiled more than a week ago in Windsor, Ontario, the goal of this plan is to increase auto production in Canada, aiming to build 2 million vehicles annually over the next decade. But how to achieve this when Donald Trump clearly says the U.S. does not want Canadian-made cars? Well, take a look at what the Conservatives are proposing. They want to exempt Canadian vehicles from federal sales tax to make them more attractive to buyers, implementing a dollar-for-dollar rule that would allow vehicles made in the U.S. or Mexico to be tariff-free, equal to the value of cars made in Canada. Also, ending subsidies on EVs and plug-in hybrids, harmonizing vehicle standards with the United States, and banning vehicles that use Chinese or Russian-linked software.
As many people will say, will the president ever accept this? This plan will actually increase American and Canadian production. American production by about 2 million automobiles, or about 17% increase in their production, reversing their decline. And it will double Canadian production up to 2 million vehicles every single year. It will ensure that we build as many vehicles as we sell. So this will be a much better deal for our American friends than they have right now, and a significantly better deal for Canada because it aligns with the stated objective of the United States to produce more vehicles at home. It is one they would realistically sign.
Well, with more on the Conservative auto plan, we're now reaching out to Kyle Seeback, Ontario MP, and the Conservative Shadow Minister for Labour. Kyle Seeback, thank you for joining us this evening.
Happy to be here.
So listen, walk us through a bit more about your plan. How exactly will your party get, the North American automakers to build more in Canada than they already do?
Well, first of all, I just want to talk about the state of the auto industry in Canada in general. We're seeing real declines in production from a decade ago, about 2 million vehicles a year, down to 1.2 million, which is the last year we have numbers for, which is 2024. And what we've actually seen from Statistics Canada is a further decline in exports this year of 32% in the first part of this year. So we're hemorrhaging auto production. What we're trying to do is bring back a policy from the past that worked exceptionally well. The old Auto Pact, it took Canadian production from around 700,000 cars a year up to 3 million cars per year. Now things have changed obviously since the Auto Pact was in place. So it's a modified version of the Auto Pact, which means that for every car that you would produce in Canada, a company is therefore able to bring in a car tariff-free, because we import a lot of cars into Canada, including the companies that manufacture here. Now, if that policy is extended to the United States, the same thing for the companies there, we believe that this will slowly increase production of vehicles here, because right now the United States buys about 15 million vehicles per year. They produce about 10. Canadians, we buy 2 million vehicles a year, we produce 1.2 million. We want to get those numbers higher up to parity. And this one-for-one policy, we believe will do that. and it has the added benefit of reshoring some auto production in the United States, which why we think it is attractive for the American president as well.
Okay, let me jump in there because I'll begin with the one-for-one, because Lana Payne, as you know, is the president of Unifor, this country's largest private sector union. They represent many auto workers, and she has issued a statement saying that she's skeptical of this plan, essentially because if your goal is to create a one-for-one ratio of produced cars with cars sold duty-free, well, she says that ratio is already nearly achieved. So how does that increase jobs that would have a meaningful impact on Canadian workers?
Well, I will respectfully disagree with Lana Payne on this. That's actually not how it is. If you were to look sort of like specifically at each company, and that's one of their complaints, is that, for example, this with Stellantis doesn't actually, their import and production is about the same. But we're talking about the auto sector as a whole in Canada. We have many companies that produce. It will actually lead to an increase in production. We've talked to the auto producers about this. They agree it will do that. Brian Kingston from the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association said that he thought this is a very good policy. And even some of the Unifor local auto manufacturers themselves think it's a very good policy. The head of Unifor 222, which is the Oshawa assembly plant, said, finally a plan that will restore production in Canada and save thousands of jobs. So there's different opinions on how well it will work, but we believe that plus cutting the GST will actually spur that production, because for every percentage cut in sales tax, you generally see a 1% to 2% increase in purchasing. So that will get us an extra 10%, and we believe that the tariff-free auto pact will get us the rest of the way.
Mm-hmm. Are you being a little overly optimistic, though? Because clearly we have an American president who says he does not want Canadian cars. We've seen North American car companies reshoring to the U.S. in response, and every American official who's given an interview, including interviews here on PrimeTime Politics, they have been very clear. Any new trade deal is going to include a tariff. Are you being overly optimistic with this?
Well, look, I don't underestimate the challenge of trying to sell this to the American president. He's notoriously difficult to deal with. But what I do think is there's some options that we have in here that are attractive. Number one, we are by far the United States' largest export market for vehicles, and they're going to want to protect that. It's $27.5 billion worth of year of finished autos that come into Canada. Number two, we're talking about, if this plan's accepted, we'll align on things like Chinese vehicles, which the Americans are very much against. And we are also talking about harmonizing on things like tailpipe emission reductions, which also makes it easier for American vehicles to come into Canada and Canadian vehicles to flow south in the border. We believe over time that this will actually repatriate some of the production from Mexico. They export about 3.5 million vehicles a year to Canada, the United States. The one-for-one plan will actually rebalance that over time, which is why we think all of this makes it actually very attractive for the United States.
Mm-hmm. Listen, quickly running out of time, but I have to ask you, because there's so much emphasis on the North American car makers. But right now, when you look at the numbers, it is Honda and Toyota, the Japanese car makers, that account for more than 76% of auto assembly in this country. Is the focus here off by focusing on North American car makers, U.S. car makers, rather than working with the Japanese?
Yeah, it actually doesn't focus on that, because the number one issue for both Toyota and Honda is tariff-free access to the United States, because most of the vehicles they manufacture actually go into the United States, and they're getting the same tariff challenges as the big three automakers are. So that's a big part of our plan, which is to get them tariff-free access so they can continue to sell all those vehicles into the United States. What I've been told very clearly by all the auto manufacturers, auto manufacturing in Canada cannot survive at the 15% tariff, because that makes those cars unprofitable to go to the United States. We believe this plan will get us there, and it'll be good for all the automakers.
Kyle Seeback, I appreciate the time this evening. Thank you for that.
Thanks very much.
To the conflict in Iran now, as countries in the surrounding region are working towards a diplomatic solution. Now, earlier today, Pakistan's Prime Minister offered to host peace talks in Islamabad, offering to bring together both U.S. and Iranian officials in hopes of ending hostilities that has already killed hundreds of people across the Middle East and has created shockwaves around the world. Meanwhile, in the United States, the fighting with Iran has sent gas prices soaring, and there are fears another spike in inflation could be looming. As it stands, support for military action against Iran is only approved by a minority of Americans, and according to this new poll from YouGov, opposition to the war is only growing.
We're in negotiations right now. They're doing it along with Marco, JD. We have a number of people doing it, and the other side, I can tell you, they'd like to make a deal. And who wouldn't if you were there? Look, their Navy's gone, their Air Force is gone, their communications are gone. That's the biggest problem. It's very hard to communicate them between themselves. All of the anti-aircraft is gone. Most of their missiles are gone. We either shot them or they shot them and don't have them anymore. They're down to a trickle. They're pretty much everything they have is gone.
Well, let's talk about this. We're now reaching out to Linda Feldmann, Washington Bureau Chief for the Christian Science Monitor, and with her, David Levinthal, investigative reporter and senior editor at NOTUS. Nice to see you both again.
Good to be with you, Michael.
Great to be here.
Listen, Linda, I'll get you to start us out because I want to talk about this push for a diplomatic end to the Iranian conflict. The president seemed very encouraged about the possibility, so much so he said that he would initiate a 5-day pause, saying he would not strike Iranian power plants or energy infrastructure, essentially to give diplomatic talks a chance. What does this say to you about the economic and political pressure the president is feeling right now that he's leaning in on a diplomatic end to this war?
Right. It tells you that he's feeling tremendous pressure. All you have to do is look at the price of gas, and see it's gone up 30% since the war started. And that is not good for Donald Trump, because people can draw a direct line between attacking Iran and Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, and here we are with gas at nearly $4 a gallon. A few weeks ago, I was paying maybe $2.60 a gallon. So he's feeling that. But he also, when he started this, he said, OK, it'll be 4 or 5 weeks. And I think, and his base is with him. I think we're seeing a kind of a rally around the flag among MAGA Republicans, the ones who are true diehard Trump supporters. But I think, there are the regular Republicans who aren't maybe quite with this, are concerned that this could just drag on ad infinitum. And so he really needs that ability to declare victory and have it end. And you've got these 3 countries, Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, who are now willing to mediate. Mm-hmm. And that is great news for Trump.
Yeah, willing to mediate, as you say, as he looks to end this war. But, Dave, I want to pick up on a point that Linda made there about Republican support, because, that YouGov number that we started out this segment with, obviously it shows that Americans are not supportive of this military action against Iran. But let's take a look at another board here, because when YouGov dug in deeper, you could see that clearly Democrats disapprove, independents disapprove, and as Linda pointed out, Republicans, at least for now, are still overwhelmingly supportive of this conflict. So what do you take of those numbers?
That middle bar, the gray bar, put aside the red and the blue, focus on the gray bar, because that is dramatic. Because Donald Trump relied on independent voters to get elected in 2024, to return to the presidency. And yet here, 7 in 10 independent voters here in the United States are saying, we do not support this war. We don't want this war. We want this war to end. Now, when you put that in a 2026 midterm election context, that is terrible news for Donald Trump. It's terrible news for Republicans, and it's very bad news for both the House and the Senate, which is under the leadership of Republicans right now and trying to retain that. So Donald Trump clearly is, his supporters, his MAGA base, they're always going to be there for him in large part. But when you have those people who are on the margins, who are sort of, MAGA light or Republican adjacent, but not fully wholeheartedly in support of Donald Trump, if they're peeling away in droves, that is something that has a dramatic political context and ramifications.
Yeah, ramifications for independents, as you say, also potentially with MAGA voters with the midterms coming up in November. But, you know, Linda, I was reading an article that you wrote about MAGA support, because there was speculation just a week ago that the conflict in Iran might break up the MAGA base. We certainly heard a lot of spokespeople who are very encouraging the MAGA movement express doubts about this, including the fact that it was Donald Trump himself who said that it would be Kamala Harris who would start a war with Iran, and he would never allow one to happen. What has happened to the MAGA base? As we said, supportive right now, but how strong is that support?
So it's a very strong support among the rank and file within MAGA. But it's interesting because you have these MAGA influencers, you know, the people that you see on TV all the time, like Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly and Candace Owens and you know, numerous other sort of brand name MAGA people who are absolutely against this war. They're saying that their definition of America first means no foreign adventures, no foreign wars. Donald Trump says America first is whatever he says it is. And in fact, if you look at his history with Iran, and he has, long before he became president, he's been in favor of attacking Iran and obliterating its nuclear weapons capability, and sort of subjugating Iran and Iran has been an Achilles heel for our country for decades. And so the fact that he's doing this in a way shouldn't come as a complete surprise, but among a lot of Republicans, they really think he should be prioritizing the economy and not spending tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars fighting abroad and endangering the lives of American soldiers.
Okay, listen, I want to share one more board here with you, because in that YouGov poll, they also asked Americans, should Americans be willing to pay more for gas during conflict with Iran? And clearly 67% of Americans say no, an unwillingness to pay more for gas, which, as you started with, Linda, seems to be a symbol of where this goes or where it might go. So with the little time we have left, Dave, I'll begin with you. What are you watching out for right now then?
Yeah, gasoline is always the barometer for how the economy is going, and also to how politics can be going too, and is a fairly good one when you're trying to test the temperature of the American public. But you see fuel costs also going up, food costs potentially going up. You see people struggling to get jobs, and yet here we are spending an incredible amount of money, including a new ask for $200 billion for the war effort that is potentially going to be before Congress. So this is just not making sense for Americans, both in a philosophical and a monetary affair. And so I think what we have right now is the Republicans and Donald Trump trying to figure out if negotiations with Iran are going to be fruitful. We have Iran saying, well, negotiations haven't really happened. So you have that back and forth as well. But Donald Trump is clearly not talking about months and even weeks now. It seems to be reverting back to this is going to end in days, but it takes two to tango, and Iran may have other thoughts too, and they still have lots of bombs and lots of missiles of their own.
And Linda, what are you watching out for right now then?
Well, I'm also, don't forget about Israel. I mean, Israel is a key player here. And, initially, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, told us that we got in because Israel got in, that it wasn't our idea to start this war when it started. So, Israel has been very aggressive in going after Iran, and they have to agree to any kind of deal that the Pakistanis or whoever is negotiating can come up with. But, I think it's pretty clear that Donald Trump wants this to end. He wants to be able to declare victory and then move on to the midterms where his party is in serious danger of losing for sure the House and potentially even the Senate.
Okay, so a lot to watch out for as this conflict drags on in Iran. But listen, Linda, Dave, always appreciate the insight. Thank you for that.
Sure, glad to be here.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, back to Ottawa now and the Supreme Court, where today lawyers for the Quebec government made their arguments in favor of Bill 21. Often called the law on the laïcité or secularity of the state, the law itself bans the wearing or use of religious symbols by public sector employees in the province. To protect the law from legal challenge, the Quebec government preemptively invoked the notwithstanding clause, and it is the use of that clause along with Bill 21 that's being challenged this week in the court. Yesterday, we heard from groups who oppose the law, and today, again, were the groups and lawyers who support Bill 21. Well, with more on the case, we're now joined by Geneviève Tellier, Professor of Political Studies at the University of Ottawa. Geneviève, thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
So I want to begin with yesterday, because clearly we heard from religious as well as professional groups that were making the argument that Bill 21 is discriminatory. Again, beginning with yesterday, when you listened to day one, what stood out for you?
I heard two things. The first thing is that it is infringing on our individual rights. So the right to have his own religious and to manifest, like having religious symbols, it's an attack towards your right to do so. And so, what are my individual rights? And the state should not have its say on what I believe, my thought, my belief, whether religious or not. So that's one aspect I have seen. Mm-hmm. Another one, which was new, it's a new argument, was, and I think it's a phenomenon tied with what we see in the US, was if we go that way and suspend some individual fundamental rights, we are opening the avenue for maybe dictatorship. And so what will prevent Quebec society or another society of having someone to impose thing and get rid of the Charter of Rights? And so this is kind of a new argument that I've heard today.
A new argument on the notwithstanding clause, because to their point, if you can invoke it, then what recourse can you have if you have someone wanting to suspend civil liberties for everybody? Yes. You know, at the heart of it, though, when you look at the Quebec government side, is this tradition of laïcité. And really, that's a tradition that comes from France. And there was a French citizen who I spoke to, and she described it as, you know, the founding values of France, liberté, égalité, fraternité. Underlining all of it is laïcité, which I think arguably is a different understanding of a pluralistic society than what comes out of the British tradition.
Yes, it's really a sharp contrast between those two, I would say, society. And for the French vision, and I think in Quebec also, is that a state that is neutral is a state that is fair for everybody. And so, yes, if you want to talk about liberté, égalité, fraternité, you shouldn't take side as the state. So having a religious state or a state that value one religion or some religion, it's probably a dangerous avenue to do so. And so for France, historically, they have said, no, we get rid of the monarchy, we get rid of religious power, authorities, and having a laic state is the best way to prevent us from going that way.
Yeah, and that's the argument that we're seeing applied to Bill 21. With its impact aside, that is essentially at the heart of the argument. And so the Supreme Court's going to have to measure, I guess, the limits of that, but also we'll have to measure what to do with the notwithstanding clause, because going back to your other point about dictatorships, potential dictatorships, if you can suspend rights, part of what's being asked here is for the Supreme Court to perhaps set a limit on notwithstanding, which we're seeing more and more being used across the country. What would you say to that?
I think that's the main challenge. And so what has the Quebec government done was that it used the notwithstanding clause preemptively. So even before it is challenged in the court, they have said, before even that challenge, I will invoke that and I will say, notwithstanding the Charter of Rights, we will suspend individual rights and push for laïcité. So I think that it's at the heart of the matter for that case. And it's also a question for Quebec, invoking the collective right versus the individual rights. And I think that's one of the main debate and one of the main characteristics of the Charter here in Canada is that it protects individual rights, but it doesn't protect a lot collective rights. And so we saw the debate 30, 40 years ago with linguistic rights and Bill 101 in Quebec. And also there was a preemptive attempt of saying we invoke the notwithstanding clause to protect the use of French, even if it doesn't protect the use of English. And so we have it this time again with laïcité. It's to value the collective rights of Quebecers that says we don't want to see religion in the state apparatus. And so to prevent that, we will invoke the notwithstanding clause. And if I may just add one thing, we talk about France and the tradition of France and the impact of Quebec, but there's also the Quiet Revolution that we should not forget about that. And so religious was in the public sphere for many, many, many years until the 1960s, and the Quiet Revolution kind of took that away. And since then, it has been for most Quebecers very important not to put back religion in the public sphere, in the state apparatus, and have religion as a private thing. And so it's not Quebecers being against religion, it's Quebecers saying your religion, everybody is entitled to have his own faith, belief, religious belief, but it should not be put in the public sphere. It is a private matter and it should remain in the private sphere, and so the state should not be pushing or allowing manifestation of religion. It should be laic.
But as we say from the very beginning, we now have religious groups, professional groups pushing back. They say it's too discriminatory, it's too far-reaching. So we'll see what the court decides in that. Also, the issue of the notwithstanding clause, whether or not the courts will take any action on that, which I think also raises the question: how willing is the court to do this? Because ultimately, if you are going to amend or limit the notwithstanding clause, that goes back to the Constitution talks that led to the 1982 Constitution. How willing is the court to step in where Constitution negotiations took decades for this country?
Took decades, and also Quebec is not part of that, so Quebec has never recognized the Constitution that was presented as the answer to the Quebec referendum that took place just before. And so yes, so is the court willing to open the door up for modifying the Constitution? And it will be very difficult, because if we open discussion for the Constitution, Quebec will say, well, we don't just want that, we have other demands. And we could see other groups, especially First Nations, saying, well, we want also to have a say in that. So I'm not sure that the court is able to open the conversation on the Constitution, but they may raise the issue saying, well, the notwithstanding clause, is it still relevant today as it was in the 1980s? Now, don't forget that the Constitution was agreed upon because there was a notwithstanding clause. And Quebec is not the only one pushing for the use of the notwithstanding clause. Many provinces are doing. And now Ontario is also pushing for that, which is new. We haven't seen that before Doug Ford, but with Doug Ford, he's also invoking the right of provinces to use that clause.
Yeah, which just underlines how important this case is before the Supreme Court. Bill 21, notwithstanding clause, far from being over, but for now, Geneviève Tellier, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And before we go, here now is CPAC's Rémi Authier with more on the arguments heard in court today.
So on this second day of the hearing on the act respecting the licity of the state, we heard those who are happy with the outcome of the lower courts, mainly the Attorney General of Quebec, who spent half of the day presenting its position. And its position was mainly articulated on, first, the notwithstanding clause, but also attacked some of the arguments that were put forward by some parties yesterday. So on the notwithstanding clause, the position of Quebec is that Section 33 of the Constitution of the Charter is actually a compromise that was made with the provinces that respects their parliamentary sovereignty, and that we cannot go against this compromise anymore, changing the rules later on. Also, the lawyers mentioned that there is a 5-year limit for the notwithstanding clause. It has to be renewed, and this is enough, in their view of the lawyers, to create a dialogue, a social dialogue that prevents any abuse. And the case of Doug Ford's government that had to walk back its use of the notwithstanding clause in Ontario has been put forward as an example of where the society can limit this power. There was also a discussion of the declaratory judgment issue, which is that, according to the Quebec government, if a right is suspended, you cannot ask the judge to say if the law would be impeding this right if it had not been suspended. They said it is void, there is no examination of the fact that the law respects or not this right. The arguments of the English Montreal School Board was also attacked, the idea that there are English minority or language minority rights being infringed here. It was attacked by the lawyers, saying that the act does not modify the way the school board operates and does protect the idea or the the right from minorities to get education in the language that they want. Then we heard from the secular movement of Quebec that really focused on parental rights being the right for parents to have their child learn religion or morals according to their own value, to their family value, and not be imposed something in school. And it was mentioned that this right has been recognized in the past by tribunals. And then we heard a feminist group that not only explained the history of gender equality in the Charter, but also their lawyer said that there is a lack of limits on religious rights in Western societies, especially in Canada, and this lack of limits creates a situation where women's rights are sometimes infringed. And at the end of the day, we heard a lawyer representing the President of the National Assembly of Quebec. He was arguing that parliamentary privileges that were raised by other parties should not be actually considered in this file.
CPAC's Rémi Authier at the Supreme Court. Well, that is Primetime Politics for this Tuesday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.